Welcome to the third and final part of this video series on separating worksheets into separate files. And in this video, well, this is where the magic happens really. We're going to put a loop in the code, scale it up, and really harness the power of what we've done to get this task done at the click of a button. So let's get back into the file. And what have we got so far? Well, we've got this code here. We've been examining and improving this code. Now it's doing what we want it to do for a single file. And this is a good approach. If you want to do a repeated task, and in this case, we want to do the same thing to lots of different sheets in this file. If you want to do a repeated task, the first step is to get it done once. Do it for one sheet, get it working well. And we can then subsequently scale it up quite quickly into something super powerful. So this seems to be working well for a single file, but we want to repeat this. We want to repeat these instructions any number of times to get the task done for all the files in the workbook. How are we going to do that? What's the coding concept that we need to do that? It is, of course, a loop. So you might want to stop the file now. If you've looked at previous videos, other videos on the channel, you'll know about loops, putting loops into code. Stop the video, try to put the loop into the code yourself. You're going to encounter many of the issues that we're going to talk about. So let's get into it. Well, if we're creating a loop, then we need to have a variable to control the loop. I tend to use the variable name counter for loops because it's counting. Every time it goes through the loop, it goes up by 1. And in this case, I think a for next loop is going to be most appropriate. I've just indented the code using the tab key. And that allows us to understand that it's in the loop. So for counter equals, what have we got in the workbook then? Okay, I know we've got 24 entries in the workbook. Okay, that's interesting. That's not actually accurate now because I put an extra piece of information in this column. So I'm just going to make this accurate. Now, what is this formula doing? Well, if you've seen the previous series that we did using this file, you'll know. But this formula is counting. It's the count A formula. Specifically, it's counting the number of entries in this column. Why is that important? Well, it's important because we need to know how many entries are in the database. This routine could be, moderately useful if we just said to Excel, run the routine 10 times, run the routine 15 times. That might save a lot of time, but the code wouldn't be dynamic. The code is only dynamic, which is a good thing. The code is only dynamic if it can respond to changes in the database. If we delete some changes in the database, will the loop still run the correct number of times? If entries are added to the database, will the code still run the correct number of times? A dynamic solution will respond to those situations. So how do we create that dynamic solution? We can do it by having a counting formula, in this case count A, that monitors, if you like, the length of the database. We can then reference that formula in the code. That means that's going to tell us if we need more loops or fewer loops. That's going to create that dynamic quality in the code. So for counter equals 1, 2, in fact, I'm feeling lazy, so I'm just going to recycle some code here. What range do we have here? So this formula, the counting formula, is in F5. So there we go. So we're saying to Excel, run this code the number of times that is in cell F5. The value in cell F5 is going to go up and down according to the values in the database. I know I keep repeating it, but it's such an important coding concept, seeing how formulae in the worksheet and VBA code can work together to create this dynamic quality. And then we close the loop, next counter at the bottom. So what are we expecting to happen now? Well, we've told Excel to run through the code 23 times. And you might want to guess yourself, stop the video, what's going to happen now? Because we're not there yet, but we're pretty close. I'm just going to go to where I know the files are going to save here. I'm just going to clear these out to avoid confusion. Now let's run the code. This is not the solution yet, but let's just run and let's learn. Let's see what's going to happen. So I'm going to save the file, Control S, hit F5, which is going to play the code. Now I've got files flashing, just flashing up here. Okay, interesting. We did get an error message there. Okay, let's see what's going on. Seems to be working through the files. Now I think what we're going to get at the end, okay, let's stop there. What we're going to get at the end is a number of files which all relate to the same employee here, okay? So employee CO472. So I'm going to close this file. The first employee in the database there. So we can see, going back to Windows Explorer, yeah, we can see all of these files relate to the same employee. Now what was happening there, we've got this mechanism, you'll remember we've got this mechanism that should distinguish between different files and should give us different file names. Now we can see this has happened. We can tell from the file names 14, 23, 57, that's 14 hours, 23 minutes, 57 seconds, 56, 55, 54, 52, 53. Okay. Now where we were getting those error messages, I can only assume that Excel was reading the same number of seconds as the previous file. Okay, I think that's what was going on. Now this shouldn't be a problem for us because, well, we don't want this, do we? We don't want every file to have the name CO472. What we actually want is for Excel to move down the database and give the next file CO695, the next file CO470. This is what we'd like Excel to do. At the same time, we want to make sure that Excel is going to the correct sheet in the workbook. At the moment, Excel is just going to CO601 to this sheet each time and creating multiple files from the same sheet. Of course, that's not quite what we want. So we've got two things to look at here. We've got to look at navigating to the correct sheet. We've also got to look at getting the name of the file correct. So these are our two final challenges. So what might we look at here? What coding concept or technique might help us? We want Excel to move down the database. Each time it goes through the loop, we want Excel to refer to the next row down. What coding construct might help us there? Again, if you're a fan of the channel, you'll know this is to do with positioning. And positioning means the offset, means we're going to use offset in VBA. So for the first file, we'd like Excel to look at row 8. And we're going to need a variable here. In fact, save name. Okay, yeah, I'm going to create another file here, and let's just call it sheet name, another variable rather. And let's just call it sheet name. There we go. So sheet name is an informative variable because it refers to the name of the sheet in this file that we want to go to. So it's an informative variable name. Now I want to get this value, this piece of information out of the database. So I'm going to set an anchor point on B7. Sheet step 1 dot range B7. And then offset comes in here. Now, what are we going to use with offset to ensure every time we go through the loop, we move down another row? How might we do that? Well, we can use our variable. Remember, the variable in this case is called counter. The variable increases by 1 each time we go through the loop. We can harness that to move through the database to do other really cool position control things that we might need to do. There we go. Okay. So let's just see how this is working. So I'm going to step into the code here and then sheet name. Okay, sheet name equals CO472. That's what we'd expect, the first entry in the database. Let's go through the loop once. There we go. So now counter equals 2. It's the second time we're going through the loop. So what's the value of sheet name now? So sheet name is now CO695. That's exactly the effect we're looking for. A different value being assigned to the variable each time we go through the loop. That value is going to be, the next one, the next row down in the database. So now this save name, the sheet name variable, So what are we going to do with this sheet name variable? How is it going to help us? Well, it's going to help us because we don't want to copy the same sheet each time. We've got it hard coded in the code here, CO601. We don't want to copy CO601 each time. We want to move through the workbook, copying the appropriate sheet. So if we put save name, sheet name rather, in here, that means that rather than copying the first sheet, it's gonna copy whatever sheet is saved in this sheet name variable. Remember how the sheet name variable works. It's gonna, each time it goes through the loop, it's gonna go down through the database, effectively working through the sheets there, okay? So let's stop here. At this point, I'm just gonna clear out the files in my little saved area, just to avoid confusion. Let's get rid of this one too. Okay, and let's see how we do now. So let's just generate a couple of files, stepping through the code using the F8 key. Okay, files closed, next. Copy a different sheet, hopefully. We'll check that in a second. Okay, so we should have two files now. I'll just stop the code here. Should have two files now, okay. So that's looking good, yep. Now, it's not looking good, I should say. What's the problem here? We've got CO472. CO472 is the file name, okay. Now, if I open these files, I think the sheet in the file is going to be different, okay. We've got CO472. And then in the other file, where are we? Now, is the sheet different? I think it is going to be different. Let's have a look. Yeah, then we've got CO695. So that mechanism does appear to be working where we're going from one sheet to the next sheet, looping through all the sheets in the file. I'm happy with that mechanism. But what about this, this save name mechanism here? Okay, so we've got to work on this. And yeah, we can see at the moment it's kind of a static arrangement. So it's just going to take the value in B8. We don't want it to do that now. Rather than taking the value in B8, we want it to loop through the database, move through the database, work down through the database. We've already got a line of code to do that. Let's put an and sign in here, an underscore rather, to move the code onto a new line. There we go. Okay, yep. So this is what we're looking for. Okay, let's see how we go now. Again, I'm going to clear out these files. It's always a bit labor intensive when you're working with creating other files. It adds an additional layer of things you have to do, but there we go. Okay, so again, let's work through the code. So sheet name and then save name. So save name here is CO472 plus the unique identifier, working through the code. Save name now is CO695 plus the unique identifier. Let's do a couple more. Okay, save name now is CO470. Let's create one more file. Then we'll go and have a look. We'll stop the code there. Back to the save location. Yeah, quite kind of quite labor intensive, you might say, but this is looking much better, I think. So let's go to C470. This is the third entry in the database, C470. Opening up the file, and yeah, this seems to make sense. We've got the C470 details in there. So those two issues, we identified the name of the file seems to be solved, and getting the right sheet into the file seems to be solved too. Okay, so I'm feeling reasonably confident now. You can see I've kind of incrementally built my confidence there, you know, by working through the code, very slow and steady, identifying the issues and then trying to solve them one by one. But I think now's the time to try the whole routine. So I'm just going to play the routine. We're expecting to have 23 files, all saved in this location, which is now empty. And yeah, and that should be our task done. So let's play the code. Going to have the files flashing up like this. We could possibly switch off and speed things up, switch off the screen updating, application.screenUpdating equals false. That could make the code more efficient. But we're just going to work through the task here. I think that's about 10 done. And then what we're expecting to see is 23 files, all with the correct file name, all with the correct files in. Okay, so we've got, how many files have we got first? Okay, there we go, we've got 23 files. Okay, so that looks good. So let's take the last one in the workbook as a test. I'm going to go to the last sheet in this workbook, which is CO472 here, last sheet in the workbook. And then, well, we've already looked at 472. Let's look at 671. Okay, let's find 671 here. Where's 671 then? There it is. And just to test, let's look at the data in the file. Is it what we'd expect to see? Yeah, it's 671, 1994, 28th of July, and 17. Okay, so yeah, I would do some more testing, click through some more files, maybe go back to the database, maybe change some details, make sure those details are reflected in the file. But overall, yeah, I think we've got to the end of that task, and so much useful stuff just doing that task. You've got the macro recorder there. So such an important skill in Excel VBA, recording the code, finding the code in the Visual Basic Editor, kind of playing with the code, working through it. If I delete this, what happens? If I put another line of code in here, what happens? That sense of playing with the code. As long as you save the file, you know, there's not going to be any disasters. That sense of play, if you can get yourself into that mindset, then you can really unleash your Excel learning. We had the macro recorder, we built a loop in here, and we also had variables to store and recall information. So, you know, to be honest with you, that's all there is to code. You know, I'm working on really complex VBA tasks every week in my work. I'm not using any more than this. These are the basic techniques that allow you to get so much done. I say they're basic techniques, but you can see the power. You can see the power of the techniques when you get everything combined together. We could extend this task in the real world. You might want to put, for example, a password on these files. Then I'd apply the same approach. I'm not going to go through it now. I'd apply the same approach, record the code, put it into Visual Basic Editor. Can you get it working? The same applies to emailing the files. If you're using Outlook, then there's should be a fairly clean interface between Excel and Outlook. Then I would apply the same approach, record the code and review it, try to get it working for you. Okay, that's the end of this video series. I'm Chris from Tiger Spreadsheet Solutions. Hope it's been helpful for you, and I hope to see you in another video on the channel.